sometimes in sports, a referee or umpire will say no harm, no foul. In other words, there was some body contact, let's say in basketball or hockey or football, but nobody was hurt, and so decisions made just to let the players continue, and no harm, no foul. I frequently commented on the I Ching, which is that compendium of ancient Chinese wisdom, which is really one of the true gems in the spiritual literature of our world. And one of the phrases, in fact, it's the phrase that recurs more than anyone else, I think, in the I Ching, is no blame. Right? There's a passage early on in the text where Jesus says, "You have no idea of the deep release that and peace that would come when you totally give up judgment." And judgment, which is another word for blame, is really one of the bedrocks of the ego system, certainly one of the bedrocks of the ego defensive system. Not only does the separation begin when we make a judgment, God's love was not enough, and so we have to achieve our own. But what secures this thought and preserves it in our mind is the world that we made up as a defense against the mind, which we're always judging. In fact, one could say that's why we made up the world, to be replete with billions and billions and billions of fragments, each of which in and of itself would be a suitable object for our projection, whether we project our guilt and our hidden hates and secret sins onto people or pets, animals, plants, trees, the solar system, presidents, computers that fail, cars that break down. No matter what it is, there are so many opportunities in our everyday world for us to find some scapegoat, someone we could blame, right? Someone we could say has harmed us, and therefore that deserves a penalty. In sports, there are players who commit a foul are penalized. In our world, our everyday world, when we accuse someone of sin, it's not quite so harmless as giving the other team a foul shot or as a penalty of yardage or whatever. But the real penalty that we're exacting of those we accuse of sin is that they would be killed instead of us. All right, there's that line near the end of the text that says that whenever you suffer, it conceals your own desire to kill. And that whenever we make a judgment, we're saying you are the sinner and not me. And even though that may not be my conscious idea or what I'm aware of, that is what is in back of it. That's what's in back of all of our projections. I'm not the guilty person, you are, and therefore you're the one who deserves God's punishment and wrath. And again, even if we're not aware of that, even if we're only kind of mildly annoyed at someone, the underlying content, the thought in the mind that fuels this is, I need to find someone else to be seen as the victimizer, as the sinner, so that person will be punished instead of me. That's why it is so difficult to give up judgment. I mean, one of the clear messages of this course is not to judge. I mean, it's in all three books all the way through. Right? Which again is another way of echoing the I Ching's no blame. And the reason it's so difficult is that our very existence began with the judgment. Once again, that God's love was not enough for me, and therefore it has not satisfied me, and therefore I'm justified in making a self, and then a whole context of special love that will meet my needs, and I'm justified in doing that. But it's all based on that initial judgment. Someone out there, even God himself, has not met my needs, and therefore I am justified in getting even. Making up a self, making up a world that's the exact opposite to God in heaven, and indeed works better for me, because it meets my specialness and my need to be seen as an individual. Right? So since judgment is rooted, it's the very fabric of my existence, it's so difficult to give it up. Because if I give up judgment, who am I? If I give up blame, who am I? If I see people as innocent, then my ego tells me if they're innocent, then you must be guilty, and therefore you must judge. Otherwise, you cannot preserve your individual special self. And again, that's the fuel. Indeed, that's the passion that instills us all to walk this road in incredible judgment. I'm sure I speak for every student of A Course in Miracles that no matter how many weeks, months, days, years, decades you have studied this material, you still find yourself judging. All right, and it's not because you're bad or evil or wicked. It's because you're terrified of the thought, who would I be without my judgment? And yet, that's the ideal that we want to always achieve. The message we want to give our brothers is, no harm, no foul. You have not hurt me. Yes, you might have hurt my feelings. Yes, you might have even hurt my body or the bodies of my loved ones, but you have not hurt or taken or affected in any way the love and peace that's in my mind. What God has given me is within me. It's the memory of God's perfect love that constitutes the right mind that's in all of us. And nothing that has ever been done, said, from ancient times to the present or in the future can ever change that. And that's the message that we want to give to people. No harm, no foul, no blame. Whatever it is that you did, you simply acted out of your ego, if such was the case, because of your own fear, but that has nothing to do with me. So rather than choose what the Song of Prayer calls forgiveness to destroy, where I forgive you having first acknowledged your sin and judged it, I say there was no sin, there was no blame. Right? There's always the innocence of God's Son that we both share together. Last week we discussed no harm, no foul, in which I talked about the need to give up judgment and what judgment was all about. But obviously our judgment, which is a projection of our guilt, has its origin in our self-judgment. And I thought we could speak this morning about self-judgment or self-blame, which really is just another word for guilt or self-hatred. There's a passage in the text that says very specifically that self-blame and blame are the same. Since there's no world out there, when we seemingly project our self-hatred, our judgments of ourselves, our guilt outside of us onto other people, and there's nobody out there, then it's really exactly the same thing. The ideas leave not their source. Guilt, self-judgment does not leave their source, and so self-blame and blame are the same. It just looks and feels differently. That's why often it feels so good when we can get angry. There's an adrenaline rush, there's a sense of real justification, and of course when we get more and more people joining with us, then that makes it seem all the more righteous. And it feels wonderful because in that insane moment, or we could say it's an unholy instant, in that insane moment we believe we've gotten rid of our guilt, we've gotten rid of our judgment of ourselves. But the bottom line is, what do we really do with this judgment and this self-judgment? Well, its origin lies in illusion. The self-judgment is saying, I did something horrific. And originally, ontologically, that horrific thing that we all accuse ourselves of doing, because when the separation seemed to occur, God's Son separated as one Son. It was only when the projection occurred and the world was made that one Son fragmented itself into billions and billions and trillions of pieces. But it began as one Son, and it still is one Son who believed that the impossible had happened, the horrific impossible had happened. That we had told our Creator and Source His love was not enough. And therefore we would basically fire Him as our Creator, make our own God, make our own self, make our own world, so that our specialness would be honored. That's where the guilt comes from. That's what the ego calls sin, and what the Course is called original sin, except that of course there's no real sin. But within the framework of the ego thought system, that's the origin. The belief we sinned against our Source by separating from Him, and that's where the guilt comes from, and that's what self-hate is. That's what judgment about ourselves is. But since we don't know we're minds, because all this occurs in the mind, the dreaming mind, since we don't know we're mind, because we have projected it out, there's no way of gaining access to that mind, so we could choose a different teacher who gives us a different interpretation of the tiny mad idea. Namely, what tiny mad idea? Nothing happened. So the problem is we take this guilt and this hate and we seemingly get rid of it by projecting it out. The ego principle being ideas do leave their source. The idea of God's Son can leave His source in heaven, and the idea of God's Son as a guilty sinner can leave His source in the mind and project it out, and project the guilt out. And so now the guilt lies in everyone else. And once again, as I was saying a moment ago, that's why it feels so good to get angry, and that's why letting go of judgment is so difficult. Because it feels so good to say, I'm finally free of my guilt. Somebody else has it and not me. Right? But the problem is, I don't know I've done this. Right? We all have caused this veil of forgetfulness or veil of denial to fall across our minds. So all we're aware of is the world seemingly outside of us, which we experience as bodies, and we have no awareness of where it came from. And if I don't know where it came from, namely my mind's decision for the ego and to believe in guilt, there's no way I could change it. So the Course's way of helping us do this, which is why the vigilance is so important, is to monitor our minds for all of our judgments against other people, or other objects, or other things, or other circumstances. And the judgment always means, at rock bottom, someone has done something has done something to affect me and to change me for the worse. Whether I'm talking about my genes, if I believe in past lives, the way my mother carried me, the way I was brought up, the way the weather changes, the way the governments work, the way religions have been, and on, no matter what it is, I say something outside has adversely affected me, which means the problem is in that person or that thing, whether we're talking about a human being, we're talking about a microorganism, or something inanimate. The guilt lies in them, and they are the sinners, and not me. And since the ego's principle is always one or the other, if someone else is seen as a sinner, I am seen as the sin. If someone else is seen as the sinner, I'm seen as sinless, as being sinless. So if I'm really serious about wanting to let go of my judgment and my hatred of myself, I really have to be sincere in my no longer believing the lies and stories my ego tells me. And the lies and stories always will have as their foundation, you did something to make me feel the way I am. Again, whether it's somebody in my present life, in my past life, or on any level, I'm saying the reason I'm upset, the reason I'm so unhappy, the reason I'm such a failure is because my mind not because my mind has chosen the wrong teacher, but because the world has treated me unfairly. It's recognizing that and not giving substance to the lie that allows us finally to penetrate this veil and allow Jesus or the Holy Spirit to gently take us back from the world to the mind so we could choose again. But it requires vigilance, it requires honesty and integrity that I no longer want to believe the lies and stories I've told myself. I begin by dismissing the lies I've told myself about you, and I end up by dismissing the lies and stories I've told myself about me, that the whole thing is made up. Blame and self-blame are the same. Anger and guilt are the same. And they're all defenses against the simple choice we can make to remember who we are as God's innocent son.